Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, CEO, founder, Media Ops, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, TechStrong TV, DevOps Institute, and more. Thanks for joining us on another DevOps webinar. For those of you who have joined DevOps webinars before, today's may be just a little different. Rather than the typical talking head slideshow, we have a panel webinar today with some, well, talking heads, but a little, smarter than the average bear. Less slides, more interaction, and best of all, this webinar is really about you. It's about the questions you have, comments, thoughts. We will take them, feed them into our flow, and our panel of experts here will give you their best answers, guesses, feelings on what you think is important about SRE and DevOps. Today's webinar is on the intersection of SRE and DevOps, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. Before we do that, though, and I introduce our esteemed panel, let me quickly go over some of the ground rules for today's webinar. Here at Media Ops, we use the big marker system for webinars. We like it a lot because you didn't have to download any plugin. It played right in your browser, and it has a decent feature set. One of the most important feature sets that I want to draw your attention to is what they call their communications panel here. And if you'll see it, it's for most of you, it's on the right-hand side of your window, and up top it'll say chat, QA, polls, handouts. Okay. That is your window into communicating with me and the panel in here. And you have several ways of doing that. If you use just chat, within chat, if you highlight the chat, you'll see it says public, private, Twitter. We're not using Twitter for today's webinar. But if you just want to put something out there, in public to everyone attending, you can do so. And of course, everyone will see it. I'm putting something out there right now. I always ask people, it's always great to see where in the world people are coming in from. And so if you want to just say hi and where you're logging in from, a city or a state, it's always cool. And feel free to do so. You could also ask questions there. Now, the questions you asked are going to everyone in the webinar, panel and attendees alike. Anyone may answer you or may not answer you, but you can certainly put it in there. Additionally, you can do private questions to just about anyone, either on the panel or not. But again, this isn't Tinder or a Match or anything. So I would, unless someone asks you to write something privately to them, it's probably not the best way to communicate on these webinars. I also want to direct your attention now next to chat where it says Q&A. In the Q&A section, if you have a specific question that you want our panel to address, this is the place to do it, right? I will see it in here. I'll ask it of the panel, and either we will discuss it live on screen with everyone, or if we don't have time or something like that, we can answer you privately within that Q&A section. So, feel free to do that. I'm sorry, I thought I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, but of course the iMac does it anyway. Wonderful Apple. But anyway, feel free to use the Q&A for that, and you can ask our questions. And again, guys, I encourage you to ask these questions, right? This webinar is about you. It's about your questions. SRE is we have a really great topic around SRE. It's a hot topic. And these webinars, I've done a lot of these roundtables. They work best when the audience is involved. That being said, though, let me get back to what we have on store for today. So the title is At the Intersection of SRE and DevOps. And SRE, Google wrote the book a few years ago, and since then it's gotten increased play, increased buzz, increased hype. But beyond the buzz and the hype, there's a real there's a real job there. And or maybe not. Let's see what our experts have to say. But it's going to be a topic of our discussion today. The question is, does SRE kind of take off where DevOps leaves off? Take up where DevOps leaves off? Is it parallel to DevOps? Does it intersect with DevOps? Is it perpendicular? You know, if you're a geometry person, these are all important questions to you. Our panel is going to attempt to hit some of these burning questions today. Let me introduce you to them. I'm going to start off with my friend Justin McCarthy. Justin is co-founder CTO at StrongDM. Justin, thanks for being here. Maybe a little bit about yourself and StrongDM for our audience.
Sure. All right. I'll do myself first. So, so as you might be able to tell from my general appearance, definitely I've been communing with these things for a long time. So I think Linux 1.2.13 was my first kernel. It's been most of my life on a command line, it feels like. And actually, so let me tell you, I guess, a little bit about my day job. So at StrongDM, we obsess about getting your staff access to the systems that run your business. So that means combining authentication, authorization, connectivity, and access observability to create really frictionless access management across your stack in a way that all the administrators love. So secure, fast, convenient, and as automatable as you need it to be. So that's what we're doing all day long, getting you access to your Linux boxes, your K8s clusters, your databases, and so on. That's about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Justin. Let me introduce our next expert panelist, and that's Greg Leffler. Greg is with Splunk, Greg will tell you what his role at Splunk is. Hey, Greg, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here. I will do the opposite order that Justin did. I'll talk about Splunk first. You probably have heard of Splunk. We do have that advantage in that we have a well-known reputation as a logging company. That's not what I work on. We do a lot more than that now. So I'm responsible for our observability practice. And observability is sort of an evolution of monitoring, so taking the next step beyond just looking at what's going on to trying to predict what could go on and looking at more data sources than just sort of the classics. My interest in SRE comes from my time at eBay and at LinkedIn. At eBay, is much more of a DevOps kind of person. LinkedIn was early SRE along with Google. So I have a lot of experience with, a very large scale system. And some of the things that I'm interested in are just figuring out how to scale up teams, working with culture and hiring and development for SREs, and just really sort of figuring out what is unique about this job from the other jobs. So this topic was really appealing to me. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Fantastic. Thanks and welcome, Greg. Last but not least, we have Tim Yoakum from Influx Data, our friends at Influx Data, Influx Db. Hey, Tim, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. So I also go way back with Justin, doing SysOps stuff for databases. Databases on the mind today. For BBSs way back in the day, all through traditional sysadmin stuff. Now this whole SRE, DevOps, whatever you want to call it today. So Influx Db is, of course, the leading open source time series database. And we focus on time to awesome as our company slogan. We want to get people capturing metrics and taking action on those as soon as possible. And we run a SaaS product in the cloud now for people who don't want to necessarily go through all the dirty work getting things running on their own platform.
Great. Thank you and welcome. All right. We're going to start off, guys, now that we've introduced ourselves. Before we do, again, just a reminder, maybe if you came in late, if you have questions for the audience, questions for the panel, please use the Q&A section of your communications console and put it in there. We'll get to it. If you have questions for everyone or statements, comments, put it in chat public. All right, gentlemen, SRE now, since Google came out with the book, it's been what, about 5 years, has it? Something in that range. And, increasingly the term SRE, is in Google with a bullet, right? In terms of the amount of searches, in terms of the hype around it. But even in the beginning of today's event, when I said, about SRE, and how do you separate the hype from the fiction from the fact? There's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions on this. So I guess my first topic that I want to throw out to the three of you is, what's your take on the current state of where SRE is? It's a real thing. There are SREs out there, certainly. But there's only so many Googles in the world, right? And so, how do you have SREs in companies that aren't Google? And what does that mean? So, what is that? How real when we talk about SREs here? What are you saying it? Justin, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kick it off, and then let Greg and Tim jump in.
I'll kick it off from the point of view of a relatively small team. So we're not yet 100 folks, and so what that means at our scale is in practice all of the points within SRE, they end up being distributed across a few different roles. So we don't have a team that you could point to that you would discreetly say this is only SRE. But yet all of the bullet points about the responsibilities do exist. So I'll say that there's at least one big, does our SRE exist? There's at least one big component, which is total team size. We are certainly a SaaS product that's 24/7, 365. And so you also have basically that there's time zone that also is part of scale, right, as well. And so before you're at a scale where you can believably have folks following the sun and have essentially all of the on-call distribution to essentially specialists, you're going to end up distributing it in ways that are organic and fit to your business. So that's been our recent experience over the last couple of years.
Very cool. Greg, how about you guys over at Splunk?
Well, I think we're relatively unique at the size of our company in that we don't have a traditional NOC function. So every problem does get sent directly to a specialized SRE team. I think in general, the thing that's interesting to me about SRE is that it's more of a mindset than a role description. Right? If you have people who are fanatic about the uptime and performance of your site, those are probably SREs or SRE adjacent or close enough, that you can call them with that umbrella. So, yes, at Splunk, we have the SRE role. And of course, that's, their job is to keep the site running. But I think it does apply to any size organization. And I think, the SRE book and Google may have done the industry a little bit of a disservice by making it such a grand scoped kind of thing. Like, this role has always existed, right? They were sysadmins before they were sysops, they were, those types of people have done this job. And, up-leveling it into, and also you need to develop the software is sort of where, the industry is trying to go to at this point. Personally, I don't know that those skill sets are complementary. I think there is a very small number of people who have that true overlap where they could be a world-class software engineer and a world-class systems administrator in the same person. There are not a lot of those people around, is my opinion.
Fair enough. Tim, how about Influx Data and your own personal views on this?
Yeah, so we're along the same size as Justin. We're over 100 folks, but a real small SRE team. So our Slack channel is called SRE, right? But I don't know that I would say that we just do SRE. There's plenty of ops work. There's plenty of DevOps work. I feel like SRE is more of a practice within the ops discipline. It's certainly brought a lot of observability and like very fine-tuned, live by the metrics, die by the metrics type of views, and how you should be operating a SaaS service, which is great. But certainly for us, at least, we have demand to have SRE type people embedded within other software development teams, which is great because we can drive those practices down to the team level. But it is not, if you read the 3 Google books and you say, I want to do SRE, it's not one size fits all. Not everybody is a Google. You can't have a 100-person team just for one small product, maybe Google Reader, anyone. But it's certainly difficult to say that SRE is completely adjacent to DevOps and there's a wall there. It's really just a practice within the current DevOps evolution.
Interesting, and I wonder what our audience thinks about that. We have a few topics that we wanted to hit, but in listening to the 3 of you speak, I wanted to just ask your opinion again for the benefit of our audience. Certainly, when we talk about SRE, we talk about observability, right, which is a very, very hot topic for us at DevOps.com and Container Journal today. And we're talking about monitoring, right? And monitoring has sort of given way to observability, but that's probably fodder for a different webinar. But, you know, those were traditionally DevOps types of functionality that we ran into a lot with DevOps. The fact that, you know, they're such an integral part of the SRE function is where I see the overlap, where I see that parallel course versus running in head on. Interested in your take on that, or any one of you or all of you, feel free to jump in on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the traditional approach of let's instrument everything that we run in our architecture and have it tell you when it's broken just doesn't work anymore. You know, there is this cloud deployment model, there's this microservice polyglot model that everyone's running to adopt, and in a true cloud-first, cloud-native environment, your infrastructure is so ephemeral. You're treating your servers as cattle, not pets, right? Like, you don't have the luxury of knowing this particular thing going wrong means this particular thing has happened, right? You need to be able to figure out stuff that you didn't expect was going to break, or to even figure out how things are happening, right? Like, if you run a complicated enough application and I troubleshot it last week, like when I go to troubleshoot it again this week, there could be entirely new services, an entirely new flow for transactions. You know, there almost certainly is, right? So observability to me is being able to figure out what the heck is going on at any given point in time. Whereas the monitoring, you know, old school system is more like, we know all the things that could go wrong and this will now tell you. So like, you do still need to monitor, of course, that's part of observability. You can't not monitor stuff, but like as the whole world gets more complicated and the need for SRE continues to develop, like the need for observability to me is a natural follow-on, which is why I have this job now, is telling people that you need observability, because that's kind of how I see the world, is that you need it at this point. So I don't think you can separate the two, but I think if you are trying to say, hey, we have an SRE practice, we're thinking about architecting reliability into our services or architecting resilience into our world, you have to have observability as part of that. There's no way to do it without it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I agree. That's really something that we're finding we need to do at the microservice team level. Originally, we just had a group of SREs that would span the whole product, the whole platform. And it's difficult, like you were saying, Greg, all of the changes that go on, it's impossible for one team to even keep up in this microservices architecture that everybody's rushing to. There's obviously the big picture items, the big picture metrics that you can look at and get really good insight into, but we need agents in the field, as it were. We need people that are in the teams at the stand-ups looking at, what are you trying to accomplish? How are you trying to accomplish this? So that they can also instill some SRE type mindset into the development teams, and also bring that back to a centralized SRE team so that we can understand what's actually happening out there in the product. And without that, we're finding that we're monitoring a lot of stuff, but what do the metrics even mean at that point? We don't know. So we need to get really, really close to each microservices team and really, really closer to the product, which I think it would have happened whether it's SRE, DevOps, what have you. But with the SRE practice, we can push that down to the team level and really start to say, well, here's what an SLO is, and here's what you should have in mind as you're developing your product. You know, how will we actually determine these things?
Fair. So, guys, here's an interesting metric came up in another interview I had done. You know, estimates are that there are only about 20 to 30,000 tops folks, you know, with the title SRE or calling themselves SREs in the US, and really not that many more in the rest of the world, right? So with only, you know, And 20 to 30,000 sounds a lot like when you have an organization of 100. But in the grand picture of things, 20 to 30,000 people is barely a blip on an SIC code, right? It's not a big, that's not a big group of people doing this. With that small amount, how much can we expect, right? Or is that just more proof that what we think of as an SRE's role is being done by people who perhaps don't consider themselves SREs, or by organizations that'll tell you they don't have, quote unquote SREs?
Alan, I'll try to respond to that one. So personally, I wouldn't put too much stock in that particular quantification, because this is really about the frequency at which this mindset occurs in the global population. Right, regardless of what it's called. And you could be early in your career and have this mindset, right? And your entry point to this is wrapping your mind around this Kubernetes thing and getting your YAML files right. Or your entry point to it might be to learn this Terraform thing because you see it showing up in a lot of job descriptions. And I think that's exactly the feeder system that's going to feed the 5 or 10 years from now, the appreciation for anomaly detection that same person who's starting out with their Kubernetes YAML today, they're going to be on this panel in 5 or 10 years, coaching us on on how to see into the matrix a little bit better. So that's what I'd say. I'd say I'm not particularly worried about the talent pipeline here, as long as we acknowledge that this mindset doesn't necessarily come baked in with all the skills. Like, if you've spent your life in AWS, like, you're going to need to relearn all the Azure words, But that mindset is something that is kind of like a little bit intrinsic, and it's a function of your interest, and that's what you're accumulating into. That's the account they hopefully are accumulating into over their career. I feel like just because of the way the books are written, because of some of the practices are framed, I think it's fun to learn this stuff for that kind of mindset. So I think our hopes of getting more SRE and DevOps folks, I think they're decently promising.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, Justin. And I encourage those who are hiring for SREs to only focus on the SRE title, because that leaves more people for me. I'll say that it is really difficult to recruit. It's a hot market right now. And SRE is the buzzword that everybody's using and rebranding themselves. And like Justin, you're saying, I will hire 10 YAML engineers over someone who's got an SRE title and using all the buzzwords from the books any day, because it's evolutionary. And the DevOps role really dovetails into SRE practices. And if you've come up in the industry with DevOps practices and you're looking at this SRE thing, you're going to do pretty well. It's something you can learn, and it's certainly a lot of the principles you're going to learn and apply to the knowledge you already have. And when you think about it, someone who's in DevOps, like, we may have been traditional sysadmins writing a Bash script or a Python script or something, Perl back in the day. All of that kind of translates into a lot of SRE work about iterating and improving on code, instead of just doing break fix of the more historical, like, true system administrator, like get it fixed and then have the dev team work on it later. So I think the number is probably a lot higher than that. It just depends on what people are throwing on a resume.
Fair enough.
I agree. I think the biggest difference we have is, like, larger companies don't like to hire junior people. The NOC is no longer a place that exists at a lot of places, and getting the skills and the experience to be able to level yourself up to holding that title becomes the challenge. But I agree with both of you that, like, the mindset is the thing, and there's a lot more than 30,000 people in the US that have an SRE mindset, right? And so they may not exactly have that title, they may not be ready to count as part of that number, but there's a lot of work that we need to do as an industry in recognizing that people who like solving these problems, who like figuring out how to keep the systems more reliable, you are an SRE, whether that's your title or not, right? It's just, getting that push through and helping people, apply to jobs that are for SREs, right? And they're like, oh, well, my title is, junior sysadmin, I can't be an SRE. So of course you can, right? The industry changes so quickly that any, like, super in-depth knowledge that you have is probably not going to apply 100% at a different company anyway, right? Like, to your point of AWS versus Azure or GCP, like you have to relearn all of those terms and all the commands and all that stuff. Like the concepts stay the same, but all the details are different. So, like, don't be shy to call yourself an SRE, I guess would be my outcome of this. Like, if this is the way you approach the problems, is in that mindset, then you're an SRE. So I think I wouldn't be concerned about the pipeline either. I think it's just, we need to recognize, and both Tim and Justin, are at the point where they're recognizing that you're not going to be able to necessarily pluck some, L5 out of Google and drop them into your company and say, oh, you're an SRE now. That's great, right? Like, they may need to be a little bit of work to get people to where they feel comfortable saying I'm an SRE. But there's a lot of people in that pipeline. Like, that's something I wouldn't be worried about.
I think part of the problem is too, God bless our hiring managers throughout tech. So they'll go out and hire someone for an SRE role, and they want 9 years of SRE experience and a bachelor's degree or two, right? And people look at it and say, but I was a sysadmin for 15 years, but I've never been an SRE before. I'm not qualified for this job, right? And it's not just SREs, frankly. We see this Kubernetes, 10 years of Kubernetes experience. Who has 10 years of Kubernetes experience? This is a reoccurring issue. But you know what? So I think it's Amit from our audience asked the question, regardless of whether we call them an SRE. When we look at people doing an SRE role versus developers, is there a particular ratio of like how many developers or how many SREs support how much developers or vice versa? Is there a rule of thumb? Is it change? I see guys shaking their heads. Who wants to go first?
Let me try this one. So I keep coming up. This phrase keeps popping into my head. So I'm going to try it out here for the first time. So I think of it like the role of like a translator or an interpreter if you were a group of people like visiting a very different culture that spoke a different human language. Okay. So you're never going to be able to act as a translator or an interpreter for a group of 40 people, but you can imagine a group of 4 people or something having one translator, one interpreter. And actually, like, I think that one translator or interpreter is actually embedded on that team of 4, and it might even be just a member of that team of 4. And I would separate this into two maybe slightly different things for me. Like, I think there's the interpreter of how we express the theoretical deployment of the system, and that's like the DevOps, which is much more like design time, like build time, right? Like we are going to design the system to be deployed in this way. Okay, that's typically going to be some declarative expression of some deployment model. Okay, and then I think there's another school of thought which is much more closely related to the time series that Tim and Greg are showing us. which is like when I'm writing this line of code in the system, how do I want to see this quantified into a time series that I'm ultimately going to use to achieve understanding? Okay. And that's just actually, in my experience, a little bit of a different mindset, right? So when I think of our development teams, there's someone with that, how are we going to theoretically create a declarative deployment of this thing? And then another person thinking, how are we going with the tendency to think about how we're going to quantify it at runtime. As long as you've got those questions represented on your team, then I think you're going to be in good shape. And then the ratios, so it might be 5 to 1, it might be 10 to 1, but on the team itself that's building the product, you're thinking each of these thoughts, not necessarily in the same brain, but they're covered.
Fair.
Yeah, from purely a ratio standpoint, the 10 to 1 dev to SRE is about where we're at. And I would say that the experience works well if you are comfortable with a lot of the ops work, a lot of the toil that goes into triaging and figuring out what's going on a team-to-team basis. But we're finding that it makes a lot more sense to have people way closer to the product, way closer to the actual development on the ground in order to really deliver the values that we need and that are becoming even more and more visible as the SaaS product we have matures. And as we get market traction, it's like, okay, it worked for a while. Now we need people that are really plugged in and that can come back to the larger SRE team and say, like, here's what's going on. Here's what the different teams are actually doing. What do we need to do to help them? And here's what they're doing to help us.
Tim, that's what we call smear left. We're smearing it.
Smear left.
We're not shifting it. We're just smearing it actually every direction. Smear right and left.
I like it. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, there you go.
So, Amit has a follow-up to that, and that is, so, in light of your answers, do you recommend having dedicated SREs who just do that SRE kind of role, whether we call them an SRE or not, but people who are dedicated to that SRE kind of functionality? Or do you rotate that role between multiple developers to kind of get everybody, to smear it around, to use Justin's word, right? What do you think?
I'm gonna go again and just say, like, you have to have somebody dedicated, because like and particularly what I would say is, like, you could even have one person dedicated and all they did was they were just the coach on how to plan on call, for example, right? They're just the coach on how to do it. But all they can think about is the structure of SRE, how we're going to see and act on this stuff at runtime. Okay. But the system, the implementation details about how we're going to see and act are pushed down into as many teams as you can push it into. So I would say that, but yeah, you definitely need at least one dedicated person, ideally a few. That's what I would call for. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the most important thing in that dedicated person is that they really legitimately have to enjoy troubleshooting. That has to be part of the thing. And a lot of very good developers do not like that, right? They want to write the new feature. They want to, close the ticket. They want to do something else. They want to do the cool stuff. They don't want to do troubleshooting. That's boring. That's old. That's maintenance, right? You need to have somebody in each product that understands the product enough to be able to fix it when it's broken, and to be able to help plot out the future of that product in a way that's sustainable and that's scalable. I think, SRE isn't always just this break fix model, right? A big part of the role is making sure that as the services grow and as your business grows, that your applications can support that, right? And that you can scale correctly, you can do it at the right cost, all that sort of thing. So I think rotating people through like an SRE experience could be interesting, but I think you really need to have at least one dedicated person per team, and letting people pick up on, like, oh, I want to play SRE for a weekend. Sure, that might be a great idea, right? So that they can get some exposure to what does this person have to do, right? What does that look like? Maybe they want to change roles, right? It's a great opportunity for career development. It's another thing that we neglect a lot in this whole industry is, letting people experience different things. So I think that's fine, but you definitely don't want there to not be an SRE, the upshot of all that. Like, there needs to be an SRE on the team.
Fair. No one has anything else on that. You know what? My comment before about HR folks wanting 10 years of SRE experience in a role, Pradeep from the audience says, why do you think, this is a persistent problem in all of our tech, and all three of you are director or above, right? Hiring, filling people in on your team. Why do we tend to over requirements these jobs, right? Or, and how do we rectify that?
Well, I think
what I've seen. Go ahead, Greg, please.
Okay, I'll soapbox this one because my educational background's in industrial psychology, and part of the role of that job is to apply science to hiring practices to figure out what is needed for the job that you're hiring for, and then to base your hiring process and your requirements on that, right? What we do in tech, I think, is a lot of managers have good intentions with, I just need somebody that can do this task. And then they find one person that meets their requirements and they say, hey, recruiter, HR, whomever, like, this is the person I want. And the person that's writing the job description goes, okay, well, this person has 10 years of experience as an SRE, and they have a master's degree, and they also are a private pilot and surgeon, so that's going to be the job requirement, right? They don't use the actual approach of figuring out what the person needs to be successful in their role and making those the requirements. It's instead, they're often pattern matched based on a wish list candidate, I find is my experience with this. And so The other thing I'll say about this is, like, degree requirements kill a degree requirement. If you have a degree requirement, there's no need to have this at all whatsoever. The people that do this job do not need to go to college. If they did, it's fine, but like, you are cutting out a lot of very good people if you screen based on degrees. It doesn't have any bearing on the job. So really what I would say is the reason these requirements exist is because people pattern match with some luxury candidate that they want. And so that's the easiest way to write the job description, is to just look at the resume of somebody that you think would be good and say, this is who we need. And the approach that's entirely backwards from the real approach, which is, what does this person need to be able to do, and what is the absolute minimum requirement to get somebody to do that job? And it also plays into why there's only 20,000 SREs, right? If you look at the Google SRE job description, that person that would have that job is a very advanced, very senior person, even for the IC3 level at Google, right? Like, that's still a very, a very strong candidate for any other job anywhere else. So I was in charge of SRE hiring at LinkedIn for the whole org. We hired 300 something people while I was supervising that, right? Like, you need to have the screening process be based on what the job is, right? And so a lot of places don't do homework. They won't do screening exercises. They'll just ask you a bunch of trivia all day, and what's, kill signal 37, and it's like, who cares? But what you really need to be able to do is to troubleshoot a broken service. So here's a broken service running on this laptop, fix it, right? You need to be able to do a code review. So here's some code that has some errors, tell us what the problems are. Like, you need to test people based on what the actual needs of the job are, not based on just some academic sense of this is what it should be. So I think that's where these requirements come from. It's just, people need to have some sort of screening heuristic, and that's what they come up with. But the other option is a lot of work, and people don't want to do work. But that's where I think the challenge comes from.
Fair. Guys, I know other people.
I agree. So what I was going to add to that is, I wonder how closely the hiring managers, the people on the ground floor doing the work, are to writing these job descriptions. I see so many that ask for skills that, I don't care if someone can use curl or links or something. I still see telnet on requirements. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, that has nothing to do with what you're going to do day to day. So my approach is, I also agree. Forget about the education. I don't care if you have 5 years of experience or 2 years of experience or whatever. Tell me how you solve problems, and let's word our job descriptions so that we're attracting people who are really keen on solving problems, figuring things out, learning. Those are the key aspects of this role. Not being able to say, I went to school for geology and can tell you all about rocks. Doesn't do anything for me, right? So I just have to question how far away the job description is from the people who are actually going to manage and work with these people.
I'm going to speak directly to Pradeep for a second. So yeah, I would treat bullet points like that as they're part of a mechanical process. They're not the intent, probably even of the hiring manager. Just disregard it, and then ask yourself, what do I need to create to show that hiring manager that I'm going to be a fit for the job? So that task is always difficult. That's a creative task. You have to put energy into it. But it's very possible, and it will be refreshing to the hiring manager when they receive that direct email from you with the evidence that you're ready for that job.
Fair. Guys, let me change gears a little bit. I want to talk about SLOs, right? So SLOs are something I first became aware of 9 months ago, maybe. Right? I wasn't familiar. We all know SLAs. I started I helped start an infrastructure company that went public as an ASP in the .com days, and we were all about SLAs, right? And a lot of people run their businesses on SLAs. But SLOs seem to be something uniquely SRE. So let's first start, maybe some folks out here aren't familiar with what an SLO is, and who would like to try to explain that. And then, how do these translate into working with other folks on the team, whether they be DevOps or it doesn't even, not necessarily even IT, it could be sales and marketing. So first, let's tackle SLOs. Who wants to define an SLO for the audience? No one?
Not it.
No? Okay.
Greg, you seem excited to do this.
No?
That's the exact opposite of what I was doing. But yes, I can define SLOs. So they stand for service level objectives, and they're very similar to SLAs on their surface. It's really more focused around a specific metric internally that you use to meet your external SLAs, right? So, you have an SLA where you say to the public or to a customer of your service, like, this service will be up 5 nines. Good luck, but let's say that's your thing, right? And then your SLOs are internally, what does our service need to do to meet that SLA, right? What availability do we have for our storage? What do we have for redundancy? What are things that we need to be able to deliver on our SLAs?
Yeah, very specific measurements you're taking on very specific components of your infrastructure.
And I know we'll speak. So I appreciate the nomenclature here and the shift in nomenclature, just because it actually gets rid of that A word, which has a specific legal definition. So it gets folks off of the idea of what happens if we violate this. Are we going to jail? Are we out of business? And it gets folks back to the rational problem solving of how to get this number, how to keep this number where we want it to be.
So I will tell you, we have a video series we run every other week here called the SRE Show, and we've discussed this a number of times there. And to me, sort of the SLO is a kinder, gentler version, maybe without the teeth, of an SLA, right? An SLA, you blow an SLA, you don't maybe end up in jail.
Yeah. Except that's never happened. So that's the tricky thing about it.
But you can, back in the hosting business, for instance, right? If I didn't make my SLAs, I had to refund money.
You had to refund a little bit of money. Yeah.
But the way the SLAs were written, we never refunded a dime. But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, what do you know?
Right. We're SLOs, it seems to be, part of that. And there's a certain amount of, I don't want to bum anyone out, but there's a certain amount of this in this SRE thing, and that's this kumbaya thing, right? Hey, we're all in this together, DevOps, developers, SRE, security. And with an SLO, what we're doing is just setting expectations for what we think needs to get done here. The question is, if it doesn't have teeth, is it worth anything, right? And I'm sorry, my Mac is, I shut my phone, but not the Mac.
You have an objective of 0 rings for next call.
Yeah, that would be a good SLO, and if it doesn't work, so be it. Oh, well. But you can't run your business on an oh, well, right? Businesses don't run on oh, well. So how do we, is SLO the right metric for SR, or is it the right currency almost for SREs to communicate with others?
I would
leave the SLA out to the business unit. You get that out of the nomenclature of an SRE entirely. Let legal worry about the SLA. And my personal take on SLAs, like you were suggesting, Alan, you're never going to pay out, or if you pay out, you're getting a couple of pennies on your invoice. And so there's really, even though there might be legal sounding teeth, it's usually worthless. The SLO is the contract you have between service owners and the product, service owners and SREs, and vice versa. These are numbers that you're going to use as an internal metric to gauge how well you're doing in terms of reliability, in terms of actually having the right talent doing the SRE type work and the DevOps work. How are we actually performing? It's a number each team can customize to their own product, and we can better understand how that's working, and then aggregate that together if we want to say, okay, we're reaching 99.95 or whatever. Let's not go for 100% like an SLA might do, because that's not the goal. The goal is customer satisfaction, not a million nines. A million nines are great, right? 100% would be perfect. Not going to have it. Never going to happen. If you set your sights on that, you're doing it wrong. So the SLO is really, it's valuable currency within the teams. And I think you really have to be careful to not conflate that with an SLA and keep the SLA off to the business owners, the business unit.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point that Tim made about you need to A, have your SLOs be realistic, but B, they are like currency you can trade internally, right? And so it helps you make more reliable applications if you know, hey, our calls to service X might fail 2% of the time, right? Because that's the SLO that they've given us. Like that means you're going to write your app better to try to deal with that potential failure condition. Whereas if you're in this pretend world where we all say everything is 5 nines all the time, well, either you're incredibly rich or incredibly brilliant and incredibly lucky, but like otherwise there's no way that's going to happen, right? So like, and I also really liked Tim mentioning customer experience is the SLO. That's the thing that matters, right? If your entire infrastructure is on fire, who cares if your customers can check out or bid or whatever the operation is the customers need to do? That's the thing that actually matters at the end of the day, right? If when you talk about the 5 nines, they go to the phone company back before there were cell phones, right? And you know, we had 5 nines. If I can make a phone call, I don't care if the switch has melted. If my phone call went through, then it was successful, right? So like, you know, the SLO use primarily is internally in making you do better at your job. But I think it's important they need to be realistic, and you need to emphasize like the real thing that matters in the end is the customer experience. That's what your SLA is about, is giving the customer the experience they came to your product for.
Yeah, and really, Greg, one thing, if I can add, you know, you're mentioning if you have 5 nines, 6 nines, whatever, you know, you're either insanely rich or you're really, really good at it, or you have no customers. Let's be real. As soon as you start to scale, you're going to have problems. You're going to eat into that.
Agreed. Hey, a Joy from the audience that says, so SLA can be broad, but SLO should be more precise, or vice versa. I don't think it's a question of broad or precise. I think, you know, you can have an SLA and SLO kind of saying the same things, once for a customer, once for the internal team. I don't know if the distinction is broad versus precise. Anybody disagree?
No, I don't think so. I think that an SLA is typically going to be worded so incredibly narrow to protect the business from exposure in SLA claims. So I don't think that they are married together in scope or in range of what they're actually covering. Two very different things. One is to gauge how your product is working, how the customer's success is measured. The other one is more of a business side logic of, you know, this didn't live up to the expectations I had based on my contract. And, you know, these 3 things need to be measured. And I've seen SLAs written in such a way where making an SLA claim is virtually impossible unless like US East and US West go down at the same time, which US East, it's a great chaos experiment, goes down. US West at the same time, probably never going to happen. You know, what are the odds? It's the casino. The SLA is written for the house.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Well, and also you have to remember that US East has never gone down. It's just some users experience degraded performance. It's never gone down. It's just
a feature. You know,
it's a few little issues.
When the status page doesn't update and it's all green but nothing works, it's still up, right?
All right. Guys, before we jump into the next thing, I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. But, you know, we do our 4 Amazon gift card winners for every webinar. We give out 4 $25 gift cards. The winners for today's Amazon is Stan T, Megan S, Josh T, and Brittany K. Our behind-the-scenes Crackerjack Engineering webinar team will be reaching out to you and getting you your webinar Amazon gift card. So congratulations. Let me jump now into another question here. I mentioned in the beginning again, you know, SRE is intrinsically linked with monitoring observability. As DevOps and SRE continue to move forward, move closely, how is monitoring moving to observability? And how does observability enable SREs to be more effective and efficient? Right? Fair question. If you don't mind, Greg, would you mind kicking it? And
yeah, sure.
You can jump on.
Yeah, I think the big difference in the monitoring observability thing I touched on a little bit before, which is, you know, in the monitoring world, you have to know what you want to monitor, right? And in observability, that's true to an extent. You have to know what your possible data sources are. But the general approach in the observability universe is you try to instrument literally everything, like anything that can emit a time series you want to get a copy of. And then on the back end, you can use that data to figure out what's going on. So the SRE evolution of moving to polyglot microservices necessitates this move to observability, because you can't keep track of everything that's going on. There's no even a very simple application at this point. I mean, heck, I recently wanted to deploy a service called Nextcloud on my home environment, right? And it's a very simple file host, basically, with a fancy front end, and it calls 8 services in its Docker Compose file. You have to set up a reverse proxy. You have to set, and all of that can change at any point in time. So if I really wanted any degree of insight into what's going on in this stack, like, I wouldn't be able to just monitor the web server, right? Because there's a database, there's this image scanner, there's these other services that are all running to provide real-time chat, which is great as a feature, right? But I didn't even know that was part of the platform. And when you're doing this job as a professional SRE, unless you're at a very small organization, there's going to be stuff added that you don't know has happened, that you didn't get the memo that somebody was adding this feature or this service or whatever. So to me, and not just because we sell an observability product, but because I genuinely think you need it, like, you need to be able to see where your requests are going, how they're being handled. It's not enough to just set up Nagios and let it tell you that, the infrastructure on your box is bad. Because like I said a second ago, again, if the infrastructure's on fire, again, who cares, right? That's what you're paying for, right? If you're in the cloud and your CPU's load average is 9.9, okay, who cares, right? Like, your CPU is pegged, your memory is pegged. Yeah, you're using it. That's what it's for. And so what you need to focus on are these SLAs and your SLOs to figure out, like, what headroom do I have internally that's not going to impact my customer experience. And I don't think you really can answer it with the monitoring system. So as you move towards the state of the art in SRE, which is the microservice cloud model, you have to make that other move as well, is my thought on it, at least.
Justin,
I mean, monitoring, traditionally, you're looking at getting an alert that says your disk is 70% full. You need to go do something about it, right? That was great 10 years ago, but now you're looking. You need to logs, metrics, and traces, right? The 3 pillars of observability, and with that data, you inform your SLIs, your service level indicators that comprise your SLO. With just alerting, exactly what you're saying, Greg. Yes, my system load is high. Okay, it's at 38. Fine. Are customers happy? Are transactions processing within the amount of time that you have decided is okay? If that's the case, then that load average doesn't matter, and I don't want to be alerted on it.
Fair enough. So there's a difference, though, between getting alerted and observing, right? Because, generally you get an alert, okay, we got to go to DEFCON 2 here, right? We're moving from DEFCON stage 1 to 2 because I just got an alert. But sometimes I want to know what that load is, because I got to put that into context with the totality of what I'm seeing, right? And I think that's one of the things when we talk about observability and monitoring, we can almost silo. We get into these silos where, my CPU load's okay. We're okay. My CPU load's okay. But when you look at it, we just went through this. We switched to a new infrastructure provider here at MediaOps. The individual silos were green. They weren't overloaded. But when we looked at total performance, it sucked. Excuse my language. But it wasn't there. Right? And you couldn't put your finger on any one thing because, they were all at various times borderline, but not terrible. But in the totality, we had to make a move. And I think that's something, when we're talking about monitoring and observability, that we, how do you account for that?
I find one helpful lens on maybe just jogging yourself out of a way of thinking and into a new way of thinking is imagine the last thing you add to your measurement is anything that measures CPU, memory, or disk space. And then start with everything else about the semantics of the problem, like the meaning of the use cases and the transactions and the response times that are happening inside your system. I think that's generally like a pretty good approach, because I know in our system, it's extremely distributed. It's real time. We have a network of proxies all over the world that are so it's actually like things like a mutex wait time inside of a proxy running somewhere. Like actually, that's that's the interesting measurement, and it would never show up as memory or CPU.
Fair.
But it would show up as the user is experiencing something different right now.
Yeah, maybe
so
one
I
way
would
to think
say
about it also is. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Justin. Go for it.
Well, and the other thing is what I'll just also say is like, so Greg said it a minute ago, but like anything you can turn into a time series, you should. And I'm sure Tim won't argue that time series are good for business. So
I can't believe Tim would say that.
Yeah. But there's another skill set of that of just essentially working with time series is also like, that's one of the, default states that we're in when we're asking these questions is being able to blend, merge, and ratio time series.
Yes,
yeah, certainly encourage all the time series data to be measured, collect it all, right? Store it in our SAS. But seriously though, you're looking at CPU time, things like that. Maybe that's part of a capacity planning exercise more so than measuring performance or customer satisfaction. It matters, but you need to prioritize what matters most. I think, Justin, you nailed it there.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think from the example you gave, Alan, right, like it was, how did you find out it sucked, right? Like what was the thing that was wrong? There was something that you determined that, hey, this is unacceptable, right? So like that should have been part of your observability system. It doesn't just have to be application data, right? Like you can also include net promoter scores, Twitter sentiment, like you can include all kinds of things in there to help you make those decisions. And again, to see the trends over time is vital towards making better decisions. So I think there's a lot more to it than just, oh, we put in these app metrics and now we have observability. Like, no, you really need to be able to answer the questions about what's going on in my business, like all over the place. And the way you do that is through capturing a bunch of time series data, because that's how you figure out what's going on, right? That's the way you get the answer.
Excellent stuff. Guys, we've got like 3 minutes left, right? We're out of questions. Oh, I think we're out of questions. Yeah, I see the little red dot. But we'll see if that's another question. No, it was just 5-minute warning. I wanted to use the last 2-3 minutes to give each of you a chance, let people know where they can go find out more information about your company. I appreciate all three of you and your organizations for freeing you up, because you're all busy as heck, to come in here today. Justin, I'm going to start with you if it's okay.
Sure. Yeah. If you, so if anybody, we did talk about career for a second there. You can always email me, Justin at StrongDM. I'm always happy to help with ideas on how to bust through that 10-year job, 10 years of SRE experience or 200 years of Kubernetes experience, job requirements. So anyway, Justin at strongdm.com if you ever want any help with that. Happy to help with that. And then otherwise, yeah, if you find you have a growing team and they need access to Kubernetes clusters and AWS accounts and Linux boxes and databases and all that stuff, then yeah, www.strongdm.com, and you can kick the tires, give it a free trial.
Thank you, Justin. Tim?
Yeah, so monitor all your metrics. Go to influxdata.com, sign up for a free cloud account. You don't have to provide a credit card. Start throwing your data in there and start making sense of your SLOs and SLAs and SLIs, all that good stuff. And like Justin offered very generously, I'm hiring TKY at influxdata.com, but I'm also happy to talk to anybody who's interested in getting into the SRE world or who's currently in DevOps or can't figure out what they are. Always happy to help with resumes, coaching, anything like that. Drop me a line. I'm always here.
That's great, man. Greg?
I'll make the same offer as the other two guys, but realistically, I haven't been an SRE for a couple of years, so you probably should hit up one of them first. But I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk. LinkedIn.com/gleffler, and you can reach out to me that way. I work at a company called Splunk. As I said earlier, we sell observability stuff. That's the future of what monitoring is going to be. So if you haven't investigated that, check it out for yourself. Splunk.com/O. 11 and then the letter Y. That's a fun shorthand for observability. We also have a no credit card free trial, of course, but it really does help you understand more about your business. And at the end of the day, being an SRE is about being curious, right? You want to have answers to stuff. Splunk gives you those answers. That's what you want to be able to get. So feel free to reach out to any of us. I'm sure we're all happy to help more people get into the fold. Although I would probably tell you, if you're not really sure you want to be an SRE, like, run. No, I'm kidding. It's a great job. It's a lot of fun. But it is demanding. There's a lot going on. But any of us, I'm sure, would be happy to share experiences and what you should really expect the job to be like if you're not doing it now.
Fantastic. One of the things I love about being in the tech world is the, hey man, I'll give you a hand if you'd like. Happy to bounce around ideas with you. Happy to mentor. It's kind of what makes our industry what it is. So thanks to all three of you for all you do, and you know what? In saying what you just said, I think it said it all. So thank you. Thank you to each of your companies. Thank you to everyone who's watched this. We're at the top of the hour. We're going to be ending our broadcast today. We hope you've enjoyed this. We hope to see you soon on another DevOps.com Security Boulevard Container Journal webinar soon. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel. We're out. Bye-bye.